You need.
Good morning, everyone. We're in midterm tonight. I don't think anyone's going to take the midterm tonight, but show up. And good luck with it. We have Paula Kahudu again today, and thank you.
Oh, good morning, students. Forget about the midterms for now. Let's just focus on what's happening in Africa for the next 45 minutes. In my last presentation, for those of you who are here, we really talked about the challenges and the threats facing conservation, wildlife, biodiversity in Africa, the competing interests and needs of governments and peoples across Africa with a specific study in Kenya. So today I'm going to tell you maybe a different side of the story. On Monday I was showing you all the challenges. Today I'm going to show you why I have hope, why I think we can actually make a difference. I run a conservation organization called Wildlife Direct, and we are really committed to connecting people to nature so that they will value it, treasure it, and act to save it. And of course, Kenya is famous for her biodiversity. We are a mega diverse country with a phenomenal array of wildlife that is beloved not just in Kenya, but all around the world. Kenya has many threats to her biodiversity. I mentioned these on Monday. We have the remaining impact of colonialism. We have global impacts from climate change, and of course the global impacts of international demand for wildlife products, and in particular China, which is basically vacuuming up Africa's wildlife species, elephants and their ivory, rhinos and their horns for medicinal properties. The most trafficked animal in the world, the pangolin, a scaly anteater, which is trafficked at a rate of 100,000 individuals. This is a tiny and quite rare animal that is being harvested from Africa to supply medicinal needs which are frankly mythical, not really true. I'm going to remind you of the World Wildlife Fund report last year. 60% of our species have already gone extinct. 1 million species are currently on the verge of extinction. And what they've said, which I really love, the last part of the sentence, we have to collectively rethink and redefine how we value, protect, and restore nature. And this is something that I think requires really a transformational attitude and view about the importance of wildlife everywhere, but also the role that the world has to play together to save that wildlife. No individual country can save elephants or pangolins. It's going to require a global effort. I'm going to start with a little story about a very famous population of elephants in Amboseli. This is a part of the world where every single elephant is known by name. Every family has a name. They've been studied more than any other elephants in the world. The QB family, named after the letter Q in the alphabet, comprises the matriarch, Kumquat, her daughter, Quay, her other daughter, Quintilla, and her grandchildren, Q-Tip. Every single member of the family's name comes from the letter Q. The tiny baby over there, that's Kwanzaa. She was only 2 weeks old. So these elephants, this particular population and this particular family are known all around the world because they've been famously photographed by a British photographer called Nick Brandt. His photographs sell for $50,000, $60,000 per image. And he has spent decades staying with these elephants, watching them close up. They're so habituated because of research that you can actually witness them sleeping as they stand out there in the dusts of Amboseli. This photograph was taken on the 30th of October 2010, and the very next day, the entire family was gunned down. All of these elephants gunned down for their tusks. Kumquat, Quay, Quintilla, and the entire family. Q-Tip vanished. The only survivor was the little baby Kwanzaa, who was rescued. Not just family groups are targeted, also bulls. This is in Masai Mara, where mostly bulls are targeted because they have these fantastic tusks. And what happens when elephants are killed for their tusks is, unlike probably many other species which would just run away in fear at the sound of guns, elephants rush to defend each other. These are very intelligent, caring, sympathetic animals. They know each other. They will come to protect and defend each other, and in doing so, put each other at even greater risk. One of the most famous elephants to have been slaughtered during that time was Satao. Satao was probably the biggest elephant in the world, and he was gunned down. And this particular story that ran on my blog in The Guardian attracted enormous interest, that the whole world was silent while these majestic animals were being gunned down. So in Kenya, what we saw at the opening of the ivory trade in 2009 was a rapid rise in poaching across our country. Now, the governments of Africa don't like to admit that there is a problem, but we got these statistics. We also heard from people on the ground that the problem was probably 10 times greater than this. And so we decided to take action as Kenyans. Many countries in Africa are supported by international organizations, and often they wait for international press to drive some change and some demand for action. What we did in Kenya was different. We said, these are our elephants, and we're going to defend them ourselves. So we started our campaign, Hands Off Our Elephants, and we did it, unlike other organizations that basically attracted funds to put more boots on the ground, more petrol in motorbikes, more guns in the rangers' hands. We went to the courtrooms to find out why was Kenya a safe haven for ivory poachers and traffickers. We looked at the data. 2,000 arrests were taking place in the country every single year, more than actually. 70% of the case files in our courtrooms had vanished. 78% of the people who were actually being prosecuted pleaded guilty. Why? Because the penalties were very low. It's usually just a fine, maybe $100. And only 3.6% of those poachers and traffickers went to jail. What this means is that you could traffic container loads of ivory worth millions of dollars and be fined, if you're arrested and prosecuted, about $100, $200, maximum of $400. So we took our report and we went straight to the judiciary, and we went to the chief prosecutor. This is the director of public prosecutions, and we asked them to take action. We developed a list of recommendations. We went to the parliament and we went to the media. We declared a national disaster, and we started working with PR companies to put out very strong messages about what was happening to our economy. It was literally bleeding. By allowing our elephants to be annihilated by poachers, we were actually threatening our own economy, because 10% of our GDP comes from tourism. We went onto the media, we had debates, government versus civil society, which was very difficult and painful. You could see the expressions on our faces. It was hard because the press wanted to know, why should Kenyans really care about this? I went directly to the chief of police and asked him to make good his warrant for the arrest of this particular despicable character, Faisal Muhammad Ali, who was arrested for over 2 tons of ivory. That represents thousands of elephants. I was asked to leave his office. I was accused of being a poacher myself. Unfortunately, he failed to realize that we were filming the whole conversation of him threatening me and accusing me of being a poacher. And he lost his job 2 months after that. Yeah. Thank you. One of the most interesting things that we were able to do was to attract the interest of some very important leaders in the country. Kenya's First Lady, Kenyatta, was the first leader in the world to, I would say First Lady in the world, to champion a wildlife cause. So she became the patron of the Hands Off Our Elephants campaign. She'd only ever seen elephants at the age of 5. So the first thing we did was we took her into the parks to go and see elephants for herself. And we helped her to pen articles in the media. We took hip-hop artists, anybody who could influence young people in the country. Giuliani, one of Kenya's most famous musicians, had never seen an elephant in his life. And it never occurred to us how important it was that we bring Kenyans and connect them directly, practically, in the field with these amazing animals. And you can tell that, his impact was magnificent. He actually wrote a song about elephants. And then we mobilized thousands of people to march on the streets of Nairobi. I'm sure you guys might be aware of the Global March for Elephants and Rhinos and other animals, which occurs every year in October. In Kenya, we actually organized the biggest marches in the world. This year, over 4,000 people marched with us on the streets of Nairobi. And at the end of the march, which was led by the actual Minister of Tourism, he asked me, what shall I say in my speech? And I said, well, give us all free entry into the national park. And so he made an announcement in front of the press. Free entry tomorrow into the national park, which the public took to mean all Kenyans. And 17,000 people arrived the next day to try and go into the Nairobi National Park. So it was a really awe-inspiring and eye-opening moment for the government and for Kenya. We engaged students, communities, and corporates. So what we wanted to show is that funding these kinds of campaigns, change in attitude, cannot just be from international sources. 50% of our funds come from local sources, which includes Amarula, which is a local African company that produces a cream liqueur, and one of the biggest airlines, local airlines in the country. And then, after we had changed laws, increased jail sentences, changed the way that wildlife trials take place in the country as a result of this campaign, we continued monitoring what goes on in the courtrooms in Kenya. What we saw is that more courts were being created. At the port of Nairobi, the airport, there is now a court, primarily because of so many people transiting through Kenya carrying wildlife products. And we developed an app which allows prosecutors, magistrates, even criminals themselves, to track their own cases in court. This app means that no files can go missing ever again, because all of the documents of each trial are on one simple and single platform. And it was hugely successful. The media campaign led to changes in attitudes, not only at the level of the head of state, but also in parliament. There was more funds made available for wildlife conservation, more rangers on the ground, better trials, much more severe penalties. And this guy got arrested. Faisal not only got arrested, he got jailed for 20 years. And if we were able to bring this message and this success story to Obama when he visited Kenya, and what we asked for was that wildlife trafficking be treated with the same level of seriousness as trafficking of narcotics. This is important. Why? Because nobody can move dollars from Kenya or any country to any other country without it going through US banking systems, right? So money laundering is a really big part of this. And if the US government says we're going to follow the money, it's very easy, because nobody trades in Japanese or Chinese currency when it comes to ivory or other wildlife products. They trade in dollars. And so the US government, 2 weeks after this particular meeting with Obama, declared that there would be a greater interest in what's happening in money laundering. Chasing the money from wildlife trials has become a major part of the campaign. And of course, the big win for us was the government's agreement to destroy the entire ivory stockpile. A lot of people look at this and they're like, wow, what a waste. All that amazing product has gone up in flames. Well, it's really, really important. Most of the ivory that you see being trafficked today across Africa into Asia is ivory that has been stolen from government stockpiles. And this is a reflection of the levels of corruption that occur in these government agencies. And it happens because most government agencies don't put that much resources into their wildlife authorities. So the protection of ivory stockpiles or any other wildlife stockpiles is not as good as, let's say, gold or diamonds. You'll find ivory being stored behind a simple padlock, or being protected by people who are earning a pittance for a salary. And so it's very easy to corrupt them and to get access to these products. So although the elephant story is a huge success for Kenya, poaching is way down. We don't have a poaching problem for elephants anymore in our country. Poaching across Africa has declined from about 100 per day down to about 35 per day. Still bad, but it's not terrible. But we're still facing this challenge that African people want development. They want this kind of look and feel. They want to basically be as modern and developed as the rest of the world. And this is a major challenge for conservation. Visitors throng to Kenya. Over 1 million people come to witness the Great Migration, which is actually happening right now. And most Kenyans have never seen it. Most Kenyans have never seen a lion. And most Africans have never seen a mountain gorilla. And yet these are the animals that attract billions of dollars into Africa every year. But there's another part of the story. Wildlife in Africa is also exploited for the production of major documentaries which are sold around the world. And one of the challenges that we've experienced is that, we need to educate and inspire local people in Africa. And we have looked at these films and said, why can't we have those in local domestic television channels? If you come to Kenya, you'll find that local domestic channels are inundated with soap operas from Mexico and also from Nigeria. You won't see much wildlife content at all. And what this means is that people don't know about wildlife, and so when you say to them, let's go to the park, they're like, the first reaction is, oh, I don't have a car, it's expensive, I don't know what to do when I get there, I have no idea. And also no interest, because we don't have this kind of content in school or on television, or even in the newspapers. As a result, about only 10% of Kenyans actually visit the national parks. And the media is inundated with negative reports that wildlife is dangerous, wildlife threatens your livelihood, wildlife will actually kill your children. And so the reaction is that most people think wildlife is deadly and they will kill it when they see it. And this is the reality on the ground. One of the greatest threats to wildlife across Africa today is actually human-wildlife conflict. So how do we save our giants? What we've done in Kenya is initiate and try to catalyze a new movement. We're calling it Wildlife Warriors. It comprises a television series and programs in schools. And I'm going to take a few minutes to show you what we're doing in this world. We have made a point of recruiting only local Kenyan crews. So Kenya has quite a big TV industry, and there are many filmmakers. There are 2 million filmmakers in Africa. We're the only people making wildlife documentaries. I have some of the top filmmakers. They actually produce documentaries for CNN and for BBC and other international outlets. So getting them to come and work on wildlife was quite a challenge. One, it's expensive, but two, they've never filmed animals before in their life. And when they come out with me to film animals, it can be quite a challenge. So for example, when we were filming the snake episode, the cameras were often left lying on the ground and the crew had run away. And so we had to make a point of getting our crew close up to learn about these animals in order to film them in a realistic way and get the right animal behavior. We also took our crew to places they'd never been before, out to sea. We did several episodes in the ocean, in the Indian Ocean. Most Kenyans know that we have a beach and that the beach is where you go paddling. They have no idea what lives in the sea apart from the fish that you eat. So we made a point of doing several episodes in the sea, which was very interesting because I had no idea that my crew would suffer so severely from seasickness. So on this particular episode, my crew was out for most of the shoot. It was literally like an ICU on the boat. And what we were filming was humpback whales. So this is an animal that most Kenyans have no idea exists in our waters. We are part of the great humpback whale migration. So humpback whales coming from the Antarctic come up the African coast and they reach Kenyan waters where they calve. This is potentially a massive tourism industry for Kenya, but most Kenyans have no idea that these animals even exist. In fact, even the fishermen who are often out in the waters, this was 7 kilometers offshore, they're in little dugout canoes or with a little engine, and they thought that these animals were whale sharks, which is the animal that they know. They were wondering why whale sharks were jumping out of the water. So our series is intentional. Our intention is to win hearts and minds and also get people to move to action. So our episodes are all about individual characters. Wildlife warriors are people. They are individuals. They're people that we know, people who we can relate to, people that we admire as role models. Mike Mwang'ombe is a Kenyan who is not a biologist. He's actually an engineer. So he's a really unusual person to have as a champion for conservation. He's interested in humpback whales, and he records their sounds when they're in the Kenyan waters. Mike became interested in humpback whales, but lied to his parents that he was on his way to go to a job down at the coast when in fact he was going out to the shores to watch humpback whales. And what he does with his work is citizen science. He talks to all the fishermen, he gets them to take photographs of the whales when they're out fishing, and then he's created a database of all the whales that come up into Kenya. And so we went out with him on the boat with children, and he gets them to listen to the whales and get a real sense of the whales, because the chances of these kids ever seeing the whales are quite slim, but they can get a sense of the whales by listening to the whales singing to each other. Another one of our heroes, a very young woman working at the Impala Research Center. So students here probably know that Impala Research Center is in central Kenya. It's part of one of Princeton's field research centers, and it's mostly comprised of American students, European students, and PhD students and professors who come to Kenya to do research on all kinds of interesting things. in the field, savanna ecology, watersheds, communities, and social issues. We also have a number of Kenyan students working there, and Brenda, 23 years old, is studying the guinea fowl. This was one of the most favorite episodes of the entire series. Why? Because these animals are very common. And most people just dismiss them. They look like a chicken and they're running around. They make a lot of noise. Her research is the first research ever on this particular species of guinea fowl. And so when Kenyans watched this show, they responded to us and said, I had no idea that these animals are so interesting. They live in these huge colonies. They communicate with each other. They're very beautiful. They have unusual colors. And their behavior tells us something about ourselves. So if you want to watch any of these episodes, they are on YouTube. And you get to get a sense of what we're trying to achieve in the series. I want to now just play you 4 of the promos for the episodes. What do I press? Do I just press forward? Are you guys interested in watching a couple of promos? Okay, great. Oh, okay. All right. Thanks, I didn't realize.
My name is Security Ponda. I am a wildlife warrior. This of practice, they look like jellyfish, which turtle end up confusing with their natural food.
She's finished laying her eggs and now she's covering them up. She swipes with her fins, chucking sand into the pit behind her where the eggs are.
Some turtle will do like 7 clutches.
This tiny crab could actually kill a baby turtle.
Turtle bees everyone's have, otherwise they might get into extinct.
This is Wildlife Warriors.
Oh. How do I make this one go? It's not playing. I can see it, but I don't see the button. Oh, God. Okay.
The Masai Mara is one of the most productive ecosystems in the world. In case I spot any animal with a problem or an injury, I can easily contact the people concerned.
She's become the first Maasai woman tour guide and hotel owner.
It was hard, but I was trying like I should prove them out. But 2 times before they accepted me.
The presence of these animals makes the Masai Mara one of the most popular tourism destinations in Africa. This is Wildlife Warriors, and I'm Paula Kahunu. This snake has no venom, but it's clearly not harmless because it's a python and it's incredibly strong.
Those are devils. They need to be killed. So I said, no, I think they need their life. They got the local gangas, they died.
The amount of venom that came out of it, minute. This is enough to kill an elephant.
If somebody's afraid of snakes, I am actually the Dawa. I know how to get rid of those people. My name is Paul Krismamani, and I am a wildlife warrior.
My name is Ambrose Kutubel, and I'm a wildlife warrior.
One of Africa's most elusive cats, the leopard.
So many scientists, they are focusing in other animals, they are focusing in other cats, they are focusing in other species, and they are forgetting leopards.
This is an area that the leopard clearly comes to. It's a natural salt lick. We've seen the leopard's footprint. We've also seen footprints of other animals, including baboons and impalas. These are some of their favorite prey.
One day told me that there is a black leopard that is just found in my area. 2 months, we got the black leopard in our camera plan.
So those are just 4 of the 13 episodes that we've produced. And what you'll see is that there's always one hero and one species that we're focusing on. The heroes are all local Kenyans. Many of them are surprising people, like Lucy, who's the tour guide in Masai Mara. Even my crew were like, why is she a wildlife warrior? Well, she is, because she is one of the very few people who has invested her whole life in doing work around wildlife conservation, but doing it as a business. Ambrose, the very last guy who does the leopard research, part of the reason why his story is so important is because he's been studying these leopards for the last 2.5 years. He has this black leopard in his camera trap. It was showcased on National Geographic, I think hundreds of millions of people have seen it. But it was made famous on Nat Geo because a British photographer who saw what Ambrose was doing came to Kenya and took a photograph using his camera trap, a very fancy camera trap, to get photographs of that particular black leopard. And as a result, the story went from being about Ambrose to being about a British photographer. And if you go online and read up about what they're calling the Black Panther, this rare black animal that's been seen in Kenya, you won't really see anything about Ambrose. And so we felt it's really important as Kenyans to reframe this narrative. It's not about the guy, the British photographer who came. It's about the Kenyan scientist who's on the ground every day. Ambrose, if you watch his video, is this incredible natural scientist. He doesn't have a degree. He's been out there working with his local community, talking to the elders, talking to rangers, and finding out where these animals are. And so we turned this around and we took not just his episode and broadcast it, but we took a 5-minute short version of it and we broadcast it on national television. And some of the reactions from the public have been really amazing, but one, Kenyans seeing Kenyans on television, it's not just the scientist who is an amazing person, but we go into communities and we talk to them about these issues as well. So when we do that, we broadcast it in the local narrative, which gives people an even greater sense of connection. And so if you watch social media when these shows are going on air, you'll find there's a lot of positive reaction. And the people who we're filming, the scientists themselves, the conservationists, the engineers, the business people, what they're saying is that it's affecting them as well. 2 of our heroes have now gotten scholarships to go to university. One of them is actually at Wyoming University. Several of these episodes were filmed at Impala, so I really urge you guys to watch it because you'll get a sense of that amazing location and the incredible research that's going on there. So the show isn't just on national television. We are broadcasting on a channel called Citizen TV, which reaches about 30% of East Africans. But we're also streaming this show directly into classrooms. And we allow schools to form clubs, Wildlife Warrior Kids Clubs. And then those clubs do activities, watch our show, do lesson plans, read the book, so every episode comes out with a book. We also invite them to apply for a place on an expedition. So in August this year, we took 116 children from schools from across the whole country, public schools, not the elite private schools. And we took them out to Impala for 5 days of camping and working with the scientists on the ground, with many of the heroes from the series, which include people like the rangers. This was probably the most important event of the year for the whole education team at my organization, because they got to do science with these kids and to evaluate whether this program and whether the activities on the ground and the books that we give them are making a difference for these children. While some of them might be 10 years old, others are 15, 16, and 17, which means they are literally a year away from becoming voters in our country. And this is why I have hope. If we can reach this bulge of the population, which are young people, we can actually influence the direction of the decision-making in future governments. We know that the show is making a huge difference because we look at what's happening in the schools. So all of the teachers in the schools are on one WhatsApp group and we monitor the communication. So now, for the first time, schools across the country, teachers in the Wildlife Warriors program can interact with each other, share their experiences, tell us what they're doing, and learn from each other. And in this particular school, which is in northern Kenya, in a very desert area, the children have started adopting wild animals that have been orphaned. So in this case, they adopted an ostrich, which has now grown up. And this ostrich walks to school every single day with one of the kids. This is a primary school kid. I think he's about 12 years old. And the ostrich walks to school with him. And all the kids come out and they feed it their break. These are not rich kids. These are kids who probably don't even have enough to eat themselves. But they adore this particular ostrich. So they've made it something of their little mascot for the school. Another reason for hope. By sharing these stories, the success stories of Kenyans working at the front line, being able to overturn some of the most serious problems, we're able to inspire others to become wildlife warriors. And when we say warriors, we mean real champions. So for example, in the last 2 years, there's been a very, very painful and difficult challenge by Kenyans against the government and private developers and the Chinese investors on the development of a coal power plant in a place called Lamu. It's an island which has a very historic importance to Kenya. It's a cultural heritage. It's part of the World Heritage Sites. Lamu is the site of a new port, and they wanted to build a coal power plant. Why coal? Because General Electric want to bring their old equipment to Kenya and to Africa because they can't sell it anymore in Europe. So we've become a little bit of a dumping ground for this old technology, which they still want to make money off. And this is why I say that the world has a role to play. When General Electric, which is an American company traded on the New York Stock Exchange, tries to push redundant technology onto countries in Africa, the rest of the world should speak out. It's possible to stop that kind of development and to demand that companies that are bringing technology to Africa bring clean technology, not dirty technology. In this case, the local people of Lamu fought very hard. They went to court. They used legal instruments to fight against this, and they won. They were able to stop that development. But in addition, as I mentioned in the last lecture, we have more developments. Just on Monday, it was announced that the government had signed an agreement with China to build an expressway from the airport into the city of Nairobi, and in doing so, destroying an urban park. What we're seeing is Kenyans outraged. There are debates on television every day. This never used to happen. But now people are fed up with this kind of behavior where governments just take decisions and don't employ the existing legislation which requires public consultation. This particular professor from one of the universities made a comment which the Chinese responded from the embassy in Nairobi. Don't believe in fake news, which I think is really interesting. It's a very surprising comment from the Chinese, who rarely comment. They usually keep very quiet, but it implies that there isn't even clarity or agreement between the Kenyan government and the Chinese government on this particular development. The Botswana government is going through its elections today, and this is the headlines, that elephants could actually make the decision for them, which is fascinating. This is another reason for hope, that conservation, biodiversity, protection of natural areas has become an election issue in Botswana. And finally, for the first time, a major international film on wildlife, The Elephant Queen, which is actually just came out. It's actually screening. I went to see it at the Montgomery Cinema this week. This is an amazing film about elephants that came out of Kenya. It's not about people, it's not about poaching, it's just about the role of elephants in the ecosystems. It's beautifully filmed, it's a phenomenal film. A few years ago, I went to the Jackson Hole Film Festival, and there was a big a meeting and maybe a congress about elephants. And all these filmmakers were patting themselves on the back saying how proud they were that their films were going to save elephants. And I reminded them and I said, you guys are delusional. Your films are not seen in Africa. How on earth will you save elephants if the very people at the front line who need to know about these concerns aren't seeing these films? And Mark Diebel and Vicky Stone, who made this film, took it to heart. And in making this film, which took them 8 years, they then sold it to Apple, but with a caveat. It took them months to negotiate this. That this film doesn't come out just as a film. It's coming out as a campaign to educate people about the importance of elephants on the ecosystems. And so the film will be traveling around Kenya. It will be launched and premiered in Kenya, and it will also be launched with 30 educational books. And what this means is they're tapping into this idea that in order to have impact, you can't just put a film up in a box office in America and treat profits as impact. That is not impact. Impact is making these films live through all kinds of different forms. It's coming out with books, it's coming out with plays, and it's coming out with stories. And opportunities for people on the ground to actually participate. And my other reason for hope is this Extinction Rebellion. It's interesting that it's already had huge impact here in the West. It doesn't have a very much melanin in the face of this campaign, and this has been a real criticism, but we have seen some uptick in Africa, people who really do agree with the sentiments, and we're seeing protests in Kenya and in other cities around Africa about what's happening around extinction. So this is really exciting. So I have a question for you guys. I press A, right? Okay. be able to keep the result. Okay. All right, is everyone ready? Okay. Great, thank you all very much. I really appreciate it. Okay. That's it. I'm now available for any questions about that presentation. Thank you all so much. Yes. Well, do we have microphone?
What are your thoughts on Namibia selling off licenses to hunt rhinos?
Yeah, I have strong feelings about hunting in general. I think while hunting in Europe and in the States is not usually about trophies, it's often about meat or managing populations. In Africa, hunting is very much about trophies. And the hunting of animals by foreigners with a lot of money undermines the very strong conservation message that we're trying to share with Africans, because one of the biggest threats to animals in Africa is actually hunting for meat. And there are very, very severe laws. So what it means is if you're a poor person killing a dick for meat, you will go to jail, versus somebody who has lots of money can come and shoot a beautiful animal like a rhino. So that one of my concerns is that it's a very mixed message, and it's causing a lot of challenges in Africa. I don't think there should be trophy hunting. But secondly, animals like rhinos, it just seems despicable to go and kill an animal that is, frankly, it's like a cow. There is no courage or pride in shooting an animal that is standing there grazing. They say that they are hunting rhinos which have reached a certain age and they're no longer playing a role in society because they can't breed anymore. You know, it's like saying, let's shoot our grandparents. I mean, rhinos, of course they have a role in the ecosystem. They shouldn't be shot for their trophies. And finally, those trophies are being trafficked into places like Vietnam and China. So what has happened, which is really shocking, is people have come to Africa and paid, I don't know, $10,000 up to $30,000 for a hunting permit. Those horns are worth about $1 million. So it makes sense. And when the Vietnamese were banned from hunting rhinos in South Africa, they then went and hired a bunch of people from Poland and asked them, so they were Vietnamese people with Polish citizenship. And they came to Africa and bought up all these hunting permits. They're not hunting because they're hunters. In fact, the outfitters were the ones who had to shoot the animals because they brought out these generally women. At one time, it was actually they hired prostitutes to come to South Africa and hunt rhinos. So to me, what it's done, it's created a very serious unintended consequence. It's not just rhinos. Look at lions in South Africa. Over 8,000 lions in cages being bred purely for hunting. It's not conservation at all. So I have a real challenge with that, yeah.
Do you think the efforts that resist biodiversity in Africa are mainly due to like financial and industrial pressures from people who are interested in developing the country? Or is it more of a generational gap between like old generations who don't really value the animals or poaching as much as younger generations do?
Yeah, I think that many things are happening in a time frame that is hard for us to even comprehend, right? Rapid development. It is so rapid, and our governments perhaps correctly looking for improving the livelihoods of people in Africa, which, no question, it's getting better and better. The lives of people are getting better and better. But it's short-sighted and often poorly informed. And I would say that the conservation fraternity and the science fraternity has not been engaged in the way that it should be engaged. So for example, yesterday I received an invitation to participate in a government discussion about the budget of the Wildlife Authority. This is when they call on us. They want to fight for tripling the budget. And so they need the public to support them. So they're like, come, we want to talk to you. We want you to help us to win a bigger budget from government. I'm like, that's fantastic. Of course, we want you to. But you need to have a platform for scientists, conservationists, to engage government on a daily basis on all the issues, whether it's roads and railways or ports, harvesting of sand in our rivers and that kind of thing. I think there is a huge generational gap, but it's not because of the age. It's because there has been no content in our school system, on our television, in our media, that would inform the leaders of the country today. Unless you were educated outside of the country or educated in an elite school, chances are you didn't have much conservation in your education system. So I think that's a big part of it. But communities increasingly are realizing the folly of their ways, the destruction of forests. Rivers are drying up. Grasslands are vanishing because elephants have disappeared, because elephants bring all these seeds. Elephants dig up the water and allow streams to flow. So what we're hearing increasingly are communities saying, we want to lock our land up as conservation areas. And across Kenya today, 9% of the land is now locked up in voluntary land agreements by communities saying we want to keep this land wild, which is quite amazing, because as I said, these are not rich people, but they recognize the value of these ecosystems for their own traditional and cultural purposes. So I think that there is a age gap, there is a technology gap, access to government problem which is changing. We are coming out of being a very strong-arm, single-party government kind of system to being under the law, under the constitution, the government has to consult the public. So a lot of things are changing very quickly. But I also would say that Western influence, not Western, international influence is also having a huge impact. The Chinese government has come out publicly and said, don't worry about the environment today, worry about it tomorrow. Just do development now. So that's a huge problem. Yeah.
What efforts, if any, has the Wildlife Warriors campaign made to look beyond flagship or big name species to other species that play less obvious roles in the health and well-being of ecosystems?
Okay, thank you. So at the moment, the TV series looks at, well, I mean, even a guinea fowl is not really an iconic flagship species. So in the series, we try to have, you know, the big iconic animals, which makes the public want to watch the show, and then we combine it with these little animals. And in the next season, so we're now planning for season 2, one of our heroes is a rat. It's a very interesting rat. It's a deadly poisonous rat. So, you know, it's going to be a fascinating episode. But with the children on the ground and the impact that we're trying to make on the ground, what we do is we give children books that teach them about not just the animal, but its role in the whole ecosystem. And the children and the schools themselves decide what projects they can do. So for example, just on Monday, one of the schools started planting trees. So Kenyans are crazy about planting trees because one of our iconic conservation heroes is Wangari Maathai, and she put it into our blood, in our DNA, everyone must plant trees. But the way they've been planting trees has been hectic. You know, you just go and plant any old tree. We've been asking people, why did you plant this tree and not this tree? Well, because there's no education about species. So we've gone into it with a very intentional approach. If you're going to plant trees, plant them for a purpose. Plant indigenous trees to restore your indigenous diversity, because trees are probably the fastest disappearing species in the country. And so know your trees, plant the right trees, plant them the right way, and take care of them. And so this particular school planted 2 indigenous tree species, but then we also say plant other trees. They may be exotic, maybe they are casuarinas or eucalyptus, because you need fuel wood, because almost every public school in Kenya cooks the school lunch on firewood. And so we want them to have their own woodlots and produce their own firewood. So we try to combine the two things, the needs of the schools, and also encourage them to address the local biodiversity needs as well. And in the expedition that we did, the children obviously can't get close to elephants or rhinos or any of these big majestic species apart from in a car. So when we're on the ground, they're given containers and tweezers and all kinds of things to go out and collect artifacts and make their own museums. And so insects, of course, are a major part of that. And so we make sure that they have access to entomologists, guidebooks, plant books, so that they can learn about all the other biodiversity. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, great question. How do we deal with that challenge? Thank you for your comment. So in the wildlife crime side of things, so my organization with 12 people, half of them are lawyers who work on combating wildlife crime. I have lawyers who go to court and defend along with government defense attorneys, so prosecutors. When we went after Faisal, it was very dangerous. My staff were threatened, I was threatened. And we just have to take risk assessments, do risk assessments, and try to take care of ourselves. In one case, one of my staff, when he went to court, he had to have 2 bodyguards. So that's just a reality of the situation. Conservationists working in wildlife crime have been killed. There was a very famous South African man shot in Dar es Salaam in cold blood, by a guy on a motorbike, and he was sitting in a taxi. So we take threats very seriously. But in addition, so there are no poaching companies as such, since it's illegal, right? What we have are people who might be against us. On social media, recently we heard people saying, we don't need a national park in Nairobi. Which country in the world has a national park in Nairobi, in the capital city? That makes no sense. We need development, we need space, let's just get rid of this park. Those are the kind of challenges which could become contagious. And so we work with a huge variety of people to kind of put out more positive messaging. That's one of the things. But sometimes, our commentary or our position will grate against government, certain government departments. Last year, we lost 11 rhinos in a botched translocation because of very poor judgment on the part of my government. And we exposed that story, we challenged them to come clean, and we demanded that they take necessary actions and make sure this never happens again. 11 rhinos is a significant percentage of all the rhinos in the country. And that has created a very big rift between us and the government that we're supposedly working for and with. So what we do is we make sure that we balance our messaging. We are unhappy about things and we expose them, but we are also happy about some things and we will collaborate with government and support. So we do a lot of work in the media side, so a big chunk of my organization is purely around media and publicity, and we do a lot of work to bring Kenyans to national parks. One of the other things we do is make sure that we're not bound to one ministry. We work very closely with the Ministry of Education and very closely with the Office of the First Lady, and that gives us other avenues to share positive messages.
So I think we should thank Paula. Good luck at the midterm tonight. I'm sure she'll answer other questions up front, but we're out of time now.
Thank you.